Okay, everybody. Thanks for hanging with us here. We're almost done. Please join me in welcoming Steve Hawkins. He is the Vice President for Information Security Solutions at Raytheon to introduce our final keynote. Steve?
Thank you. Glad to be here this afternoon, and I'm thrilled to introduce our next keynote speaker for this afternoon. Lynn's a role model for all of us in the industry that support the intelligence community, and I think you're in for a treat this afternoon. I should know, I worked for her for 6 years, so I know what you're in for. So she made me promise not to say things. It's not official here, but no, she is the chairman of the board, the chief executive officer, and the president of Engility. And I think most people know about Engility, but if you don't, they're a highly technical integrated solutions and services provider to the U.S. government. That includes to defense, intelligence, space, and across the federal civilian market, so all across those markets. Prior to that position, she served on the board of Engility, as well as tasked before their acquisition and the board of State Street. She spent a little more than a decade at Raytheon. That's where we worked together. She was the president of Intelligence, Information, and Services business. And prior to that, she was the vice president of Engineering, Technology, and Quality Assurance in our network-centric systems business. Prior to joining Raytheon, she was in the commercial telecommunications sector, working for ADC Communications, held various officer-level roles and general management roles, including work across the globe, having operations that were in Europe, in South America, and the Pacific Rim. I think she actually lived in Australia for a while she was doing that. But she started her career at Texas Instruments as a project engineer, worked through various different roles, up to being the vice president of quality assurance in that role. She has a list of honors too long for me to go through today, but as you can see, she's been successful at every step of her career. So join me in welcoming my good friend and the CEO of Engility, Lynn Dugle, to the stage.
Now you can hear me. So before we jump in for a quick close here, just so I can concentrate, I want to say I am having a moment. There is my face and there is Sue Gordon. I'm like, wow. So if anybody doesn't want their pamphlet, I'm going to be sending these to all of my friends, so I'll pick those up. But I want to add my thanks and gratitude to INSA, Chuck, in allowing for me to be a part of this, in a environment that's super emotionally charged. We've talked about Me Too, to host this kind of a conference, right? So instead of stepping back and letting things settle, to lean forward in this way is just to be congratulated, and I'd like everyone to give them a round of applause. So when Tish asked me if I'd like to be a part of this program and then told me I was going to be the last speaker, I said, no, wait a minute. All the interesting stuff will have already been said, right, by the time I get up there. But I was drawn to the topic anyways. Engaging men and empowering women. And so I had that moment of reflection that said, okay, we're going to have had a full day. And, if he starts making the rabbit ears behind my head, I want somebody to let me know. But as I thought about it, I thought, what would merit your time and attention after that many hours? And then I had, and I think maybe Mary Legier's mom and my grandma, who is a little 4'11" orphan with a third grade education and the smartest person I know, might be related. Because as I was thinking my way through this, I had a BFO. Now, before your mind goes someplace it shouldn't be, BFO is blinding flash of the obvious, right? And my BFO was, it's not just that we've talked about this topic all day. It's that we've had active engagement and dialogue on this topic across decades. And so once I came to that realization, I had to personally reflect. And so my question to myself was, why after 20 years, right? Why aren't we having the celebration that says, as John emphasized many times, powerful women and extremely engaged men, right? And it's always going to be a journey. It's always going to be a part of the process. But I went back to something my grandma taught me. And she said, when you're not getting the outcome that you want, right, think less about changing the circumstance or changing the other person and more about changing yourself. And so it's in that spirit, I'm going to share some things that I, upon reflection, know I should do better, could have done better. And I don't say this from a kind of a forensic science kind of piece, but offering my commitment to you and inviting you to have that same path of reflection, and for all of us to be saying, men, we're not going to say what we'd like to change about women, and women, we are going to stop expecting men to change or read our mind. And we'll all take a small piece of personal ownership and change as we move forward. So I have three areas that I have fumbled over the years. One, the first is having the courage and the patience to not just communicate, but explain. So that's my number one. Second is I can do a better job at separating stereotypes from real difference. And third, I'm going to be better about not telling myself no. Not because of me, because if people see me do that, I'm sending the wrong message. So let me kind of jump in to point number one. And I'm going to use a little bit of a visual aid here. Anybody ever felt like this cartoon? If you can't see it for the side, two women on a bar stool saying, gosh, really appreciate getting a mentor, but what I really need is a nap. And so in the spirit of number one, not just communicating, but explaining, I had this moment. I was a young mother. I had two children under the age of 2. My first P&L role, I was living in Austin Sunday night through Friday night, and I had a husband who was living with the nanny and our children. And I got a great offer from my company. Guess what it was? Gee, Lynn, we'd like you to not just have a mentor, but be a mentor, and boom, 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 boom. And it all sounded great. And what I should have said, but I did not, is I would love to do that, right? I know it's a responsibility, but for me right now, I have to put my family and other things first. And so I'm going to have to not walk away from that, but I'm going to have to defer that, right? And I didn't do that, and it was another action. And instead of being a wonderful experience for me and my mentor, it really fizzled. So that's my first example of a failure on when I should have said, great, but not now. My second example on explaining versus communicating was also personal. So and this doesn't sound quite as embarrassing as it did this many years ago, but I found myself unexpectedly pregnant, first baby at 33. And at the time, that seemed just incredibly old. And so I went in and I said to my boss, because I was supposed to act for him while he was out for Christmas. And I said, I'm not going to be able to do it. And he, this was back in the day where he had a few vulgar profanities and said, yes, you are. You signed up. There is absolutely no excuse that will be good enough for you not to be here over Christmas. And I said, I'm going to have a baby on December 25th. So I probably could have done, this isn't the part of my story, but I probably could have framed it a little bit better. But he immediately asked me, are you going to come back to work? And so I remember being very insulted by that question. It was kind of like, well, my husband, works on the other side of the building. I don't think anybody's asking him that question. Or, are they trying to imply that I shouldn't come back, right? So I'm kind of assuming I know what people are thinking. And now what I ask myself, was that really what they were thinking? Or were they intuitively acknowledging what the facts were? And the facts are, they were and they still are, that women carry more child rearing and home responsibilities. And maybe what they were asking me is, wow, that's a lot, right? And what I should have done is said, yes, I'm coming back, but I appreciate the fact that this is a big change of life, and there's things that I'm going to need your help on, and in order to do this well. So I missed a moment for better explanation and education. The second thing is, and this is kind of my favorite part, separating stereotypes from real difference. So how many of you have ever thought, or you might have said it out loud, women just talk too much? Yeah, I've said that, right? I'm tired, right? I just like working with men, no talking. And so and so I am one of those engineering people that might not have a sensitivity gene, but I'm going to put that aside as well. But I started digging into this, and where this idea got some real traction was in 2006, and I'm going to read this. There was a book published called The Female Brain. Has anybody ever heard of it? One of the premises was, or the examples given in the book, was that women spoke an average of 20,000 words a day and men 7,000. And so that idea really got a lot of traction. And a few years later, it got debunked because this book was not a scientific book. It was a self-help book, right? So if you're a techno nerd, right, the idea that, think back in 2006, men predominantly, probably more in the office, more time meetings, more time listening. Women perhaps more engaged with childhood activities, giving instructions, helping with homeworks, and so forth. But by then, it was almost too late because this idea, it was probably already percolating before, seemed to come across as scientific fact. So that's a case where I'd say, that's a stereotype, right? We can all listen better, but as women, we need to know that we have a little bit of overhang here, right? So the way I've responded to that is I always make sure when I'm in meetings, I ask very precise questions. I don't ramble. I'm very specific, right? Because there can be that type of stereotype, and so I want to take that off the table. So let me give an example of real difference. So women, how many times have you found yourself complaining to a colleague or thinking, I just said that, right? Or that was my idea, right? So what's up with that? So why am I putting that up as an example of real difference, right? So if we say, hey, I felt talked over or not heard as a woman, why is that a real difference? Well, I found this fascinating, and I actually found this piece of data about 18 years ago. And in it, there was a study, and I've got source documents if anybody's interested, but it basically came out of a journal of brain function. And what it says that the study found, and I'm going to read this, that the vibration and number of sound waves in a woman's voice makes it harder for men to decipher what they're saying. When men process a woman's voice, they use more complex auditory parts of their brain that are similar to processing music, right? So it's a bit more taxing. So two things I think come together, right? And that is, what I try to do in response to that is I try to speak a little bit louder when I begin the conversation. I try to use people's names. I try to say John or Mark or Susan, right? That gets attention. And I acknowledge that when I start speaking and someone interrupts me, that they might not have actually heard me, right? So that was area 2. So area 3, stop telling myself no. And Dr. Hines mentioned this, many people did, about imposter syndrome. And I don't know if I had imposter syndrome, but I definitely had a bad habit of telling myself, well, probably telling others no. And the epitome of this, like, you know, you're going to sit here and think, I cannot believe she was that stupid, and you'd be right. So I had the opportunity and privilege to be offered the president's position at Raytheon for the Intel business. And so my boss pulled me into the room, and I actually thought, because I'd always worked hardware and, you know, I'm on the ground EO side, I thought he was going to talk to me about another job, and I had this, you know, really articulate and well thought out reason for saying I don't want to, you know, I don't want to do that job. And he said, Lynn, I want to know if you'll let me put your name up to the board of directors to be the president of the Intel group. And really, I was just flabbergasted. And so what I did is, you know, I said, gosh, you know, Bill, you know, X person would be so much better for that job, right? They've worked in the industry, and he said, you know, not going to go there. And well, what about this person? Because, you know, he knows the customer and he's worked in the field. And I got down to about the 4th name on my list of better people. And finally, he literally gave me the hand in the face and said, shut up. You need to stop talking. I didn't ask you into my office to ask for ideas of people who would take the job, right? I asked if you'd take the job. And so I left. And it never struck me how backwards that was until I shared that story as a joke. And one of my best friends said, you're not only a moron, and with some more colorful language around that, she said, every time you tell that story, you are an absolutely horrible example to every other person in the room, male or female. So for me, I'm going to take that on. I'm not going to tell myself no, and I'm not going to let you tell yourselves no. So any of the things that I've shared, as I went through that reflective path over the last week or two, I'm not holding up these 3 things as the things. I hope that each one of you has very different things that you want to take on and play forward. I hope victory for me in this session will be if at least a few times you didn't say, I cannot believe she just said that out loud. I adamantly disagree with her, and you know, take all the words, moron, stupid, uninformed, ill-informed, because I hope in that moment you don't just stop there. You say, because I have a better idea, right? I've got a better recommendation, and I'm going to do things very different. I hope that since you have your papers out and you've got your sounding board and mentor, that you'll jot down a couple of those things on a piece of paper and put it in your tickler file in 30 days, come back. Because I hope each one of us are really going to take ownership for accelerating progress going forward. Because in the 21st century, men can't succeed without women, and we can't exceed without men. So that's our common ground and our common objective, and I'm going to go after that with a lot more energy than I have in the last 20 years. So with that, Susan, I'm going to open to Q&A or close, and we can. All right. Any questions for me? Yes, ma'am.
Allison, hello, from Harrisonburg, and my background is information science, and when you shared this, it was her idea, but I tightened it into a concept. I woke up to that in my mid to late 20s. I was on the board of directors for the American Society for Information Science and Technology. I felt like a big kid, and I had this brilliant idea, and I put it on the table, and everybody just looked at me kind of strange. Like, what is this thing doing in the room? And I was really kind of put off by it. And then maybe 20 minutes later, the guy sitting 2 people down from me, he says nearly verbatim what I had put on the table, and all of a sudden, you know, he was walking on water. And I couldn't understand that, and I wonder, do you have any recommendations or insight on how to better handle, address a situation like that?
So I guess if I go back to kind of earlier remarks, I would start with don't assign ill intent. You know, when that happened to me, I thought, my God, that was rude. You know, my grandma would have said, you know, are you born in a barn? Like, you know, those kind of, you know, and so I was assuming, gosh, they deliberately spoke over me. You know, they deliberately, took my idea hostage and so forth. And so I'm trying to start at a different place, right? Benefit of the doubt. That said, right, what I also should have done, right, is if I was thinking that, I should have owned it in the meeting. Not been rude, not been disrespectful. And if I didn't feel comfortable there, saying, you know, Mark, I'm really glad to hear you build on the idea that I put forward, and I'm excited after the meeting to work the details with you. Then after the meeting, we need to go back and say to the facilitator of that meeting, you know, I felt I was talked over, my idea was hijacked. How could we work together, right? What's a better way for me to board my ideas? So again, I guess my big theme is that my self-criticism is I spend a lot of time kind of mentally critiquing people, or, you know, complaining, to my female colleagues. You know, if I had a nickel for every time I said, you know, they just don't get it, I'd be embarrassed. And so to me, I would say take ownership and take action, because you don't have to accept the situation, but let's start from a positive. I think I saw one yeah. I think they're, and I'm going to end right at 4:15, so I know everyone, I can see those little wine glasses in your eyes.
Lynn, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for sharing those 3 points, and your especially like own it in the meeting. I think that's, I'm going to write that on my paper and take that one back. As I get long in my career, and I've had a lot of different jobs, I look back, and some have been easier than others, some have been more challenging than others, and each one's been unique. So can you look back over your different positions and describe maybe what was like the hardest challenge and why, and what and maybe another title or opportunity you had that ended up being something completely different than what you thought you were getting into?
Probably the quickest one would be the biggest team I had ever led in my life was 7 people. We had a massive program at Texas Instruments where all work shut down, so huge for a public company to have a very large percentage of our revenue stopped. And the top 3 leaders were debarred from ever doing work in the defense world. I was one of 3 new people that was asked to go down, and at the time I was running the test teams, quality, reliability, engineering, field agents, and so forth. So I went from a 7-person team to about 2,700 overnight, and in an environment that was, people were incredibly frightened on could we solve it, right, and what that would mean personally to them. And to the company. It was a 7-day-a-week operation, 3 shifts. And literally, not that my husband was counting, but for 87 days, I was home most times between about 1:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning. So hugely challenging. The best job I ever had. It taught me all the things that Mary Legier and others have mentioned about listening to people, learning from people, not putting the pressure on yourself to have every single answer, but showing that complete determination, that grit, that confidence that we as a team could move forward. And that's one time where actually I hadn't thought about this till just now. Is that was also a job I said no, right? I can't do that. I only manage 7 people. What am I going to do with thousands? But you've heard it a million times. Take those. Don't be scared. Lead your team with integrity and confidence. And even if it doesn't become the perfect outcome, you'll learn a lot and you'll be a much better leader for it. So, Karen, I'm going to let you ask the last question, and I expect it to be easy.
It will be easy, because I've had the lovely privilege of knowing you for a while. It was really nice that you shared these, and were humble enough to share these pitfalls that you have. I would actually like to ask you what you feel were the things that have made you so successful, because you are, and so it couldn't be the fact that you had no confidence or those not saying no. So what do you feel are your best attributes that have gotten you to where you are?
Well, thank you. As my grandma would say, just be quiet and be gracious. Thank the person. So thank you. I would say, and my husband thinks I made this up in self-defense because. He calls me a bad idea generator, and frankly, I've got a list as long in my arms on doing some really, really spectacular belly flops. That was why I was a little nervous on having Steve up here introducing me. But I guess kind of in growing up, with my grandma is a big part of my life, right? She talked a lot about experimentation. Right, and so when I think when each of us we come into a situation, if our personal ego and if we define our success as a leader or an engineer or whatever, by making sure we get the absolutely perfect outcome in every endeavor, we are not just going to limit ourselves, so we're going to limit the organizations that we serve and the mission that we served. And so experimentation is picking that up and saying when you try to do something, you have a hypothesis, right? You think, if I do this, I'm going to deliver, 18% more Intel products to my customers, and that means that for the men and women we serve. And then you go forward and you try new things and you find out that no, you didn't get there. That's still a successful experiment, right? Because you had a hypothesis, you looked at the results, and then you drove that back into your next experiment. And so I just think it's very liberating to move forward. It's very liberating. It was certainly liberating for me not to feel like I was carrying that entire burden It allowed me to reserve the right to get smarter and not be embarrassed at all to say what I suggested was a mistake or it wasn't correct, it didn't get the outcome, and then we go again. So I think all of us should give ourselves that grace. Not everything's going to be perfect, and so just own that, know it, play it forward, and give your teams, the people that you work with and for, that freedom as well. So with that, thank you, and thanks again to INSA for just an incredible day, Chuck.